everybody. This is the Spurs Insider, our NBA podcast from the San Antonio Express News. Become a subscriber and read more in-depth sports coverage at expressnews.com. I'm Mike Finger, joined by Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn this week, back in the studio, handling some summer topics. The NBA never takes a day off or a week off, and we've got this edition of the Roundtable, we've got Marcus Morris, the would-have-been Spur, maybe briefly Spur, not sure how to define that. Lots of other free agency news. We got Russell Westbrook changing teams. We want to get right into it with Marcus Morris. And how long was he a Spur, Jeff McDonald?
Well, I was going to say I have verbally committed to be here for this podcast today, but I also have a 1-year, $15 million offer from the Knicks that I'm contemplating, so I might not be here for very long.
If you listen to the people out there, you got to consider state taxes as to whether or not you want to go do that podcast with the Knicks. That's a big factor these days.
Good point. Cost of living.
That
sort of thing. Yeah.
What went wrong, and how much did it hurt the Spurs?
How much did it hurt the Spurs? I mean, you know, what was interesting was the Marcus Morris thing kind of seemed like it was going to be extra, right? Like we were sitting here the last time we had this podcast speaking about DeMarre Carroll, re-signing Rudy Gay, and that was their offseason. And I thought that was okay. Like it didn't blow you away, but that was okay. They addressed some needs. So from that perspective, they still have those two guys and address those needs. I think we're not getting a guy in Marcus Morris that you didn't think you were going to get in the first place. Where that hurts you is you traded Davis Bertans to make it happen, and you weren't going to do that otherwise.
Yes, that's the whole gist of this. It's not that Marcus Morris didn't come here. It's that you traded I keep mentioning this in print, but I mean, Davis Bertans was a unbelievable success story in terms of the Spurs' development and finding a guy that people didn't necessarily know about. I mean, he was a throw-in into a trade at one point, and he became a productive NBA player for this organization, a guy that everybody liked having around. And they did not trade Davis Bertans eagerly. I mean, it's not like they were putting him on the market. We need to get rid of this guy. You traded him because you think that Marcus Morris can give you more for this particular team, and he just kind of becomes the casualty in all this, right, Tom?
And we lose a great time killer. In that period, we can go into the locker room before games, and you know, Dobbs would always give us good stuff when you had a specific question for him, but you could also kill time and chit chat with him about any topic.
And I know this is a huge concern for the listeners and the fans out there to make sure that the beat writers, the reporters, have ways to kill time in the locker room.
Exactly.
But to that point, I mean, you like to see personable people succeed and be happy, and Dobbs was that type of guy for us, just always kind of outgoing and friendly, and I think that made him popular not only with reporters but with his teammates.
His teammates, yeah, he could give and take with the best of them, from what I could tell, which was really neat to see.
Yeah,
and basketball-wise, he was a guy with value, and now you've traded that for nothing. I mean, the Spurs would have loved to have kept him under these circumstances, and he would have contributed next year, or he had all kinds of interest around the league. They could have traded him for something rather than nothing, if that's what they're going to trade him for.
You lose not only what he gave you on the floor, which, I mean, by now, Spurs fans kind of realize what he is. I don't think he's going to make any more huge leaps as a player. He's a great shooter. He's the classic stretch forward, not the best defender in the world, never will be, not the best playmaker, but he definitely has a role in today's NBA.
He's a 6'10" Steve Kerr.
Right, exactly. And that's the other part of this. Yes, they end up signing Trey Lyles, which we can get into later, but if they did not think that Marcus Morris was coming, and to review for anybody who has not been following this, they had a deal in principle with Marcus Morris on a 2-year deal worth about $20 million. Before that is signed, Marcus Morris gets a $15 million one-year offer with the Knicks, decides to take that instead. If Bertans was still around, not only would you have that production, but you'd have that trade chip, like you just mentioned. And if you could use that salary if you wanted to pursue, just to throw a name out there, this is not reported info, but like an Andre Iguodala or somebody like that. The Dobbs contract kind of matches up better. Now you don't have that anymore, and you're hamstrung in a way where you do go sign a guy in Trey Lyles, who might end up being great, but I think for right now at this moment, you'd rather have Bertans than Trey Lyles.
Yeah, and from a broader perspective, it's just a continuation of uncertainty Spur-like things happening to this franchise that we're not used to seeing. The fans certainly aren't. Going back to Kawhi, and R.C. Buford has to deal with this stuff that hasn't been dealt with in a long time.
A part of it is just that's how the NBA works now. Players have taken complete control of their own destiny, so to speak, and more power to them. But I mean, it takes some adjusting to that new reality. I mean, they were shocked Kawhi did what he did, and they were shocked Marcus Morris did what he did. But I think that's going to become more of the norm in the NBA going forward. That teams are just going to have to learn how to navigate around, as opposed to these outliers that they've been up to this point.
Not a lot of. I don't think there's been a lot of examples of the Morris situation. In terms of having an agreement during during that down period and then backing out and another kind of side plot to this, which I don't know how much we want to discuss too much, but the common denominator with a lot of these guys that the Spurs are dealing with is Rich Paul, who's best known as being LeBron James's guy. He was the representative for Marcus Morris, and apparently is not anymore. He is the representative of Trey Lyles. He's the representative of DeJounte Murray. And so a lot of Spurs fans out there are upset with this agent, but like, why are we dealing with LeBron James's agent? But I mean, you deal with every agent these days.
Yeah, I like that. I got some of that on Twitter. Like, we should never deal with any sort of Rich Paul player again. Well, okay, let's just not have an NBA team.
Exactly.
Because he's got all the good players. So the agents and the players have the power in today's NBA, and you just have to kind of suck it up and get used to it.
What move on to Trey Lyles. What do we know about him, Tom, and how do you think he fits?
Well, he's part of that youth movement. What do they have? About 8 players now that are all in that 20, 22, 23-year-old range. He needs work. He needs development. Had a great season. Not a great season, but a good season 2 years ago. Averaged about 10 points, 4 rebounds. Then he had hamstring issues last year. So with the Spurs development staff, maybe he improves as a three-point shooter. Certainly has to improve defensively, but he's got some potential. I'm not saying it's he's not Morris, but this could work out. It could be a better plan B than what people think.
Yeah, I think you call it a reclamation project. He is a former lottery pick. He's one of those Kentucky guys. He's been around the league a little bit with Utah and Denver.
It says something about the league that the reclamation project, which you're absolutely right, is 23 years old.
Yeah.
He seems to have some skills for a guy his size, but the fact that he can't seem to shoot would be sort of a red flag in today's NBA. That's something he's going to have to improve. But it's also one of those, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I mean, it was a plan B. He had nothing else to do with that spot. I don't think, as we mentioned earlier, I don't think they trade Davis Bertans if they knew the payoff was Trey Lyles. Yeah. And nothing against Trey Lyles. I just don't think that was the plan.
I think you can say that without insulting Trey Lyles, without insulting the Spurs, without really blaming anybody. They did not come out on top in this circumstance. And like Tom mentioned earlier, there's been 2 decades of things working out for them, and now they don't always happen that way anymore. Moving on, both of you guys got to spend some time out west at Summer League. Salt Lake was first. Tom made that trip. What stuck out from that trip, and kind of what was the take back from that?
Well, Lonnie's the big story from Summer League, and he certainly showed a lot of improvement in Salt Lake City. I kind of focused in after that Utah game. When he missed a three-pointer at the buzzer that could have won it. It was a contested shot. Still, it was a good look. But he's improved in that area. His mid-range shots, he's doing well in that area, but he still needs work on his three-point shot. He showed some signs of improvement in Salt Lake. The rookies were fun to watch. Luka, Keldon Johnson, Weatherspoon, they were all fun to watch. The word that was used with them throughout Salt Lake City was moxie. I mean, those guys just, Ahern, Blake Ahern talked about that a lot. He liked just how they were not awed by the moment. Not that it's a big moment in summer league, but they showed some moxie.
And somewhat surprisingly, or uncharacteristically for the Spurs, all three of them are going to be with them this year. I mean, even Weatherspoon signed to a two-way deal. So for most years, you're maybe one draftee is with the team. There were years when no draftees were with the team.
That's right.
This year, there's going to be three guys that are at least hanging around. Not playing a lot probably, but hanging around.
Yeah, my takeaway from the Las Vegas portion was that the Austin Spurs are going to be pretty good next year. Yeah, they're going to have a pretty good team because that's where those rookies are going to spend the most of their year for sure. But I mean, like a lot of rookies, but especially in the case of Johnson and Luka, 19-year-old rookies, you can see a lot to like and a lot of raw spots where you want them to work that out where they're not affecting the NBA team as much. You mentioned the word moxie or whatever. The guy that really impressed me the most really was Keldon Johnson out of that group. He has the look sometimes of a guy that's just going to be one of those dog kind of defenders and players. He was a guy that he's 19 and wasn't taking crap from anybody out there, and I like to see that.
I covered the Little Russ game where he was dubbed Little Russ by Thomas Robinson, and that's hyperbole, we all know, but he did fill up the stat sheet, and granted that Lonnie Walker wasn't on the court that night, but still he flashed his potential in so many different areas.
Where is Lonnie Walker going to fit on the big team this year? That's I think one of the more compelling questions for this team moving forward because he showed so much. And Jeff, you and I were talking. Maybe you had mentioned it to others last year when people talked about how Lonnie needs to move up to the NBA team because all these other guys like DeJounte and Derek White made the similar leap, and he's clearly ready. Well, for a lot of Lonnie's Austin time last year, he wasn't dominating. Like Derek Walker, when he was in Austin, he was putting up huge stat lines. DeJounte the same way. Lonnie didn't dominate Austin or the G League to the point those guys did, but he did look really good in the summer league. And this could be kind of more verification that the Spurs were on the right time frame with him in terms of letting him get his feet wet, becoming comfortable at that level, and now he's ready to kind of make the next leap.
Yeah, I don't know what that looks like on the NBA level this year and where he fits in the rotation. I could certainly see scenarios where you're just not. I mean, can you really play Marco Bellinelli over this guy at this point? Or maybe Patty doesn't play as much and Lonnie gets those minutes. I could certainly see that. I could certainly see them taking their time because I do. But I know there are some people on the staff that are really pushing for let's give Lonnie Walker sort of a sink or swim moment this year and see what we got there, because he's going to be the most athletic person on the roster. He's going to do things that nobody else on the roster except for maybe DeJounte can do. So let's see what he's got. Let's see if he can fit in. Let's see if he can raise his game to the level of NBA caliber competition. He's jumped up to summer league. Can he make that next little jump?
We've toyed with depth charts, and it's one thing to say now Patty Mills and Marco Bellinelli are third string. But, I mean, over the course of an 82-game season, everybody, so many people get just banged up from game to game. There's rest nights. Patty and Marco are going to play. And Marco, I mean, was as kind of erratic and up and down as he was last year, was a big reason why they made the playoffs. He had some big games that got them to win a couple of games. And I know you're kind of rolling your eyes, but, I mean, Marco was he provided some value last year. He was a net negative in the playoffs. He was a net negative some nights.
A lot of guys were. They're outside shooters.
Marco can contribute to a winning team, can contribute to victories during an NBA season. And yes, I think when you go into a season and you decide how, as a coaching staff, you're going to divvy up playing time this year, absolutely Lonnie Walker should be a higher priority than Marco Bellinelli or Patty Mills. But those guys are going to play. I think everybody's going to play. And going back to what we talked to in the last podcast, the Spurs do not have the star power that a lot of teams in the Western Conference do. But they can go. They have third stringers that have won games and that are probably going to play important roles this year. And how much does that depth pay off during the year? We don't know yet, but I think it's definitely a team strength.
Right, but it's also hard to play 14 guys a night.
You're not going to.
Yeah, I know.
Did you think at this time last year that Bryn Forbes was going to be starting at point guard in November? I mean, they were looking for ways to get. One of the reasons that Tony Parker left last year is because they had too many point guards, and you had DeJounte and Derek White and all these guys.
I think it's fair to say at this time last year, we didn't know where or how or if Bryn Forbes was going to play at all.
And he became huge. So, no, you're not going to play 14 guys a night, and there are going to be nights when Patty doesn't play, when Marco doesn't play, maybe when even Lonnie Walker doesn't play. But I think over the course of a season, these things kind of work their way out. Anything else from Summer League that sticks out?
Yeah, Eubanks showed some improvement. He's tossing in those 70 styles hooks.
Yeah, gotta appreciate the hook shot.
But no, he's shown some improvement. He's a two-way guy. Not going to probably enter into their plans too much, but he's shown some improvement.
One of the questions that I noticed Jeff was getting on Twitter was about why the Spurs don't have another center. But I mean, and these. In this era of the league, I mean, LaMarcus and Pirtle are your centers, and if anything should happen, you can throw a Eubanks in there for a night as a backup or a Metu or whatever. I think the way the league is changing, they're perfectly fine in terms of size.
We didn't get to see Chimezi because of the foot injury, but yeah, it would be interesting to see what he does in training camp and preseason if he's shown some improvement.
If we want to broaden our scope beyond just the Spurs, it was kind of a boring summer for the NBA in terms of player movement. Even since the last time we talked, I think there was Kawhi was still deciding. Russell Westbrook was still a member of the Thunder, and
so was Paul George.
So was Paul George. First of all, Kawhi, I think. All three of us were kind of, if you would asked any of us throughout the season, the Clippers have always been a favorite. I mean, they fired our good friend Bruce Bowen to make way for this a long time ago. So, but any reaction to where Kawhi ended up and kind of how that happened?
I think the surprise was the Paul George part. It came kind of in 10 or 15 minute waves. And that was actually the night of the earthquake game out in Las Vegas, and so I had come back to the hotel to sort of put up a couple of graphs on that online, and just happened to sit at a table with, and this was before any of that happened, but the only other writers there were from LA and Oklahoma City. And all of a sudden, one of them's like, "Hey, did you see this about Kawhi Leonard going to the the Clippers?" And so they're all scrambling. And then I think I was the one who was like, "Did you see this about Paul George?" And then the Oklahoma City guys are all scrambling, and I was just laughing because all I had was a stupid earthquake to write about.
There was somebody else's problem for a change after the year that all of us had with Kawhi.
But then, like 2 days later, the Marcus Morris thing happened, and it felt like that was karma for me laughing at those guys.
Clippers were a good team to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the favorite in my mind.
I would agree.
Gallinari, and you upgrade with Kawhi and Paul George. They've got a very good coach.
Yep.
I mean, they're the favorites.
You throw Pat Beverly in there, I don't know how anybody scores on that team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that once that, I guess the Paul George news leads into what Russell Westbrook being on the market.
Right.
And there was Miami out there for a while that seemed like a possibility. I think a lot of people always wondered if Houston would do it, but it still came as kind of a surprise to see it actually happen. And my point on what the Rockets did is, I guess they're in a position where you have to do something, but that has the potential to be, it's cliche, but boom or bust in a huge, huge way. Like they can be incredibly just dynamic on offense with those two guys, two just forces of nature in James Harden and Russell Westbrook. But if this thing goes bad, it can go bad in a major, major way. And I guess that's just the gamble you take when you're in Daryl Morey's spot.
Yeah, I was wondering, do we think Houston is better today, worse today, the same, or we just don't know because...
I think the variance is higher.
Yeah.
I think that before this trade, you kind of knew what Houston was going to be because we've already seen Harden and Paul play together, and you figured they're probably going to win 55 games, finish first, second, or third in the standings in the conference, and then kind of have the same playoff run that they've had before. This thing, they could be the most dominant team in the league at times if Russ and Harden play together for a while. But if it falls apart, you go back to like that Lakers team when everybody thought that when they had Steve Nash and Dwight Howard and all those guys. I mean, things can fall apart in a hurry in this league.
What makes James and Westbrook separately so good is them having the ball in their hands all the time. I don't know what one of those guys is if he's standing around watching the other guy.
That's the question.
I mean, I guess you can stagger them in a way. So sometimes it's just one or the other. I don't know. Chris Paul was older, and kind of getting on his last legs and whatnot. But that fit was a little better to me because he was more of he could help you out even when he didn't have to.
And where does he end up? That's an intriguing question in itself.
The Thunder are kind of an interesting team now. They have a lot of these parts that came from elsewhere, and they're not terrible, but the West is so good, and that leads into, I think, what we're going to finish with in this roundtable. It's hard to find teams in the West that just we absolutely know are going to miss the playoffs. I mean, it's maybe like the Suns and the Grizzlies, Timberwolves, who aren't terrible.
Sacramento's better.
I mean, last year at this time, the Timberwolves were like the 8th seed that was going to be on the rise,
right?
And they didn't really. I mean,
right?
They're back to just probably a lottery team.
We've said this many times. I think we said it last year. We said it all summer. The Spurs can be better than they were last year and maybe not win as many games. And you can say that about a lot of Western Conference teams. It sounds like heresy to say that the Spurs might not make the playoffs. They've been doing it for 2.5 decades now. But, I mean, this could be a better team, and I think it will be a better team with DeJounte Murray back and with DeMarre Carroll and some of these guys that they brought in. They're going to be better. But the automatic wins just aren't there anymore. And wanted to get you guys' opinion on what are the playoff chances?
Well, not to use the old cliche but they really need to get off to a good start in this season, because the one advantage they're going to have over all these other new reconstructed teams is this continuity thing. They need, and the schedule will be interesting too when it comes out, because they need a schedule that works out for them. If they can bank a lot of wins early while the rest of the league tries to catch up, then I think they might have, they'll improve their chances a lot. If they're getting pounded at the beginning of the year, then I think you're in a little bit of trouble, because the rest of the league will catch up, and you won't have that cushion built in.
And I think they'll be better early. What was the big problem last year early? It was the defense. But with Carroll, DeJounte back, they'll be better defensively. So I think they'll avoid that bad start. Not seeing the schedule, of course.
Right. There's going to be, in a weird way, a lot of pressure on that team right away to win. Like you guys are talking about, a bad start could doom this team, and that's going to sound ridiculous too, because traditionally the team has come together during the rodeo road trip and stuff like that. But not lately, and I think that will be an important thing to watch to make sure that they take advantage of their opportunities when they have them.
But I do think some of these teams we think are playoff locks are going to wind up not being playoff locks, like we saw with the Lakers last year. I think obviously getting Anthony Davis with LeBron will help, but.
And we just mentioned Houston. We don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, there's always a team or two where that they look really great on paper, and then it just flames out spectacular.
There's no more moves left, is there, this summer?
Not unless you want to trade DeMar.
That has not. I guess that's the last thing. I mentioned the last thing was the last thing, but this is the ultimate last thing. The DeMar extension was a possibility starting on July 6th. The Spurs could have offered him.
And remains a possibility.
And remains a possibility until the season starts. But that never seemed like the likeliest outcome, just because he's almost 30 years old. You aren't sure yet whether that's the guy you want to build around. And to play devil's advocate, next year there's not a great free agent class. So if he opts out, it's not like you can go grab one of the many guys who are available this year. Those guys aren't going to be available to grab next year, but it's still a lot of money to commit to a guy who may or may not have peaked.
Yeah, and there's still time to work that out. I mean, I think when LaMarcus was in this situation a few years ago, it was we were into training camp. It was September before they decided on an extension. So, you know, I don't think it really means anything that it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. We will continue to watch that for the rest of the summer. We're counting on things to sort of slow down over the next couple of weeks, but we will be back in this fine studio with all the egg crates and the great acoustics, and we appreciate you all taking the time to listen to the Spurs Insider, our NBA podcast from the San Antonio Express-News. Get each day's top sports headlines delivered to your inbox at expressnews.com/newsletter. We will be back in a couple of weeks, maybe around there, and until then, you all take care of yourselves and keep it real.
Read the San Antonio Express News.